All right, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you here with us today for another Art at Noon. Today is a program I've been looking forward to for quite some time. So this is Pattern Masters, Decoding Art and Film Through the Mythic Lens. I'm Abby King, the Assistant Director of Adult Programs and the Zoom facilitator today. I'm speaking to you all from Philadelphia, and I wanted to acknowledge that, at least where I am, we are gathering on the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape people. I always want to start today with a huge thank you to all of our PAFA members that I see in the crowd today. Thank you all for being here and supporting us. If you enjoyed this program and maybe another one of our PAFA programs, please consider joining if you haven't already. I'll be dropping a link to that in the chat momentarily. And just some quick Zoom housekeeping things. I know this is the thousandth Zoom we've all been on, but I'm going to ask that folks please stay muted for the duration of the program. But again, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. Feel free to drop things in the chat, comments, questions. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the program. So note that we won't be addressing questions as we go, but we will have a time set aside at the end there. And also, if you'd like to ask questions at that time verbally, we love to hear from you. It's great to hear folks' voices over our little boxes. Just make sure to virtually raise your hand, and I'll go over that at the end, just as a reminder. I did want to mention that we are recording today's program, so this will be shared on PAFA's YouTube channel later in the week, and I'll be dropping that link in just a moment as well. So if you know of anyone who might be out in the sunshine today and couldn't make it, please, feel free to share that link with them. We'd love to. We have a great library of our past programs, so feel free to, if you haven't already, check that out. We have a few other amazing events coming up at PAFA. I want to make sure to highlight. We have Dr. Lee Sumpter teaching a series. So this is a bit of a sneak peek of her class, which is going to be New Myths in Black and Indigenous Art and Film, which is starting March 25th. The class is going to explore the heroine's journey through works from the exhibition Taking Space, Contemporary Women Artists and the Politics of Scale, and will feature select films showing female protagonists from African Indigenous descent inspired by that exhibition. So I highly recommend, if you enjoy today's program, to sign up for Lee's 4-week class to really get in more in depth for what she's going to be sharing with us today. I also wanted to mention, just because it just went up on the website, but our next Art at Noon is going to be on March 31st and features author and scholar Kirsten Buick. Her lecture is entitled Animated by Hope and Desire, 3 Black Artists at the Nation Centennial. And so this is going to be exploring the experiences of Edward Mitchell Bannister, Mary Edmonia Lewis, and Henry Oswald Tanner, PAFA alum. So I hope you can join us today. Now I'm going to now drop a link to all of those resources before I forget, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker and turn it over to the woman of the hour. So here are those links, and I'll drop those at the end of the chat as well. But I'm now excited to introduce Lee Sumpter, PhD, scholar and multidisciplinary artist who applies strategies of world building and mythic design towards building better, more resilient communities of the future. Her academic research explores the anatomy and aesthetics of the apocalypse myths, focusing on the feminine archetypes in the end time, excuse me, and Afrofuturist narratives. Lee's creative research and collaborative design initiatives engage the art of survival and sustainability through diverse ecologies and stories of change. Lee is also an active independent educator and eco-arts activist, working through Myth Media Studios, the Escape Artists Initiative, and various arts and community-based orgs in Philly and around the country. I am so pleased to hand things over to Lee Sumpter. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Lee, for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the intro, Abby, and thank you to PAFA for this lovely invitation to join you for Art at Noon. I'm very excited to be here. And again, thank you to all of you for being here on this beautiful day, wherever you're coming from and patching in from. So I'm gonna set up to share my screen and really just kind of get started here. Can you see this?
Yep,
Okay,
looks great.
there we go. Okay. So again, welcome. This is Pattern Masters, Decoding Art and Film Through the Mythic Lens. So as Abby mentioned, I study mythology, and I got my PhD in mythological studies and depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, but I also received my master's in art education from NYU, where I really became fascinated in the study of codifying and patterns as it relates to language and literacy. And so all of this really does inform my practice. And so as an educator too, I think it's important to ground us in some terms that we're going to be exploring through the rest of this hour. So these terms are important for us to kind of understand how all these things fit together, right? So one of the questions, or a few of the questions that I'd like to ask, are around language, right? And what is the language of the imagination? What connects dream and reality? What connects cultures across time and space, right? And what are the building blocks of myth, movies, and other visual narratives? That's what we're going to be digging into today. So the three, I think, important terms to begin with, myth being one, and these, of course, there's many definitions for these terms, but we're just kind of going to ground ourselves in some terms and in some definitions that are going to work for what we're about to cover. And so myth is a framework of belief, a form of storytelling, and also a tool of world building, right? And we get into that, as a kind of a common term, a buzzword even, if you will, nowadays in terms of speculative fiction and science fiction. It also relates to urban planning, and world building can come into play in a lot of different places, but mythology is one of those ways to do that. Archetype can be defined as universal ideas, often in the form of images, recurrent motifs, often found in myth, film, dreams, and the psyche, right? The imagination. And then symbols, I think most folks are familiar with that term, and it can be described as an image or an icon that stands for something else, right? So I think also too, to get kind of a collective view of how all these things fit together, one thing I always like to kind of start out with when it comes to defining mythology is that mythology is not the antithesis to truth, right? It is not fiction per se, right? A lot of folks want to say they think about truth and myth as kind of on the opposite sides of a reality continuum. And on the contrary, myth is actually, like I said, a framework of belief, and it gives rise to reality in the material world. And so if you think of things as a lens, like if we're going to be looking through a mythic lens, we can see kind of how all these lenses fit together and are kind of intertwined in a way, or overlapping, better yet. So in that sense, I think we can see that mythology is kind of that all-encompassing lens, right? Through which all of the things can be seen, including reality, history, and society, even a more specific lens of art, media, and culture. And then even more specific, we have the lenses of say, certain perspectives like ecology or religion, politics, even Afrofuturism and feminism. These are all lenses through which we can see all of these things: art, media, culture. We can see these things do color our reality and our history and the way we view society. So that's kind of just getting, like I said, an overview of how all these things kind of fit together. But starting with some of these historical figures that I think are really important when it comes to understanding pattern mastery, right? And this starts with Carl Schuster, who, this was a book, Patterns That Connect was the book that I came across when I was doing my master's at NYU. And I was in this class called Art and Social Change. And this book really, it was pivotal for me because I already was fascinated with symbols and ancient cultures, from like Egyptian hieroglyphics and all these kinds of things, in terms of glyphs and symbols. But one thing that Schuster did was that he showed how there was a kinship across cultures, across, like I said, time and space. And he showed how they connected in different ways. His research was, he was an American art historian, but his research, crossed over into anthropology and into the study of artifacts and textiles, sculptures, writings on walls. He really was fascinated with this and had a way of bringing it together. And the thing about Schuster's work was that he seemed to really see the language. He kind of uncovered this language that existed within these works. And here he says the basic bricks used in the construction of genealogical patterns are conventionalized human figures. He kind of noticed the glyphs and the symbols that started to form a language or started to form the building blocks of a language that were recurring and repetitive over different tribes, and then from different tribes to different cultures to different countries, and even different hemispheres of the world that were connected in this way. And that had never been done before. And then you have someone like a Claude Levi-Strauss, right? Claude Levi-Strauss is interesting too, because he was what we call, I guess you could say, he was a French anthropologist, but his work really became popular in a lot of the ways that, say, French philosophers were known not just to their field, but their work became popular among other disciplines and other fields of study and other sectors of culture, because there was things about their work that informed these other things, these other studies. So for example, these are some of the works of Claude Levi-Strauss, like Myth and Meaning, Anthropology and Myth. He really did a lot of work around myth and what we call structural anthropology or structuralism, and breaking things down in terms of cracking the code of culture, right? He was very much into, he was very much into this one quote I wanted to read. Is it a quote here? Hold on. It was, I'm sorry. No, I'll skip that. But I really just wanted to say that as far as Claude Levi-Strauss goes, for me, the work of Schuster and Strauss really does connect in terms of how to build these blocks in a way where you can actually build worlds, right? And that's what we're talking about, world building. And it comes into this idea when we're talking about philosophy, we talk about consciousness. And this is kind of where the work of Carl Gustav Jung is one where you really get into these archetypes of the collective unconscious. That was central to his work. Carl Jung is someone who, and again, with my degree in mythology, another thing was depth psychology. It was a dual degree in mythology and depth psychology, and that's where Jung comes in. And Jung was not just a psychologist, but he was also an artist, right? He was a prolific writer, and he didn't just talk the talk, but he walked the walk, in the sense that one of the quotes from Jung, he talks about, as a plant produces its flowers, so the psyche creates its symbols. And symbolism was something that was so central to his practice, to his research. These are some of the works from Jung that you may even be familiar with, because Jung's also someone whose work did kind of cross over into other realms of study and sectors of life, different scholarship, really did kind of find value in the work of Jung as it applied to their own fields of study, particularly the archetypes and the collective unconscious. And when you think about archetypes, you think about the shadow, the mother archetypes, the mentor and the guide. These are some of the archetypes that were known to his work that were then explored and amplified in different ways. Man and His Symbols is a popular book that a lot of folks, even outside of the field of psychology, anthropology, find of value and of interest. But one that I think that really is just something to behold is the Red Book, also known as Liber Novus. And this was published posthumously, right? But it was one of the most recent works of Jung's that came out and really kind of painted him in a different light, in the sense that we really got to see that Jung was an artist in his own right. And you can see these are some of the images that he himself painted and created, and very intricate, very symbolic works, very mythic in nature, painting his dreams, the figures that came to him in his dreams. And what was interesting about this time when he was doing this research, a lot of his core principles and a lot of his seminal ideas came through the work of his work on this particular project. And he also was working on it during like what he called a dark night of the soul. Like a lot of these ideas came to him when he was going through a very challenging, very difficult time in his life. So hold on. These are some more here that I find particularly fascinating because, you know, from the mandalas, you know, these were big symbols for Jung. The mandala, which I think many folks are familiar with in terms of it being used across cultures symbolically in ritual and meditation practices and things of that nature. But Jung referred to his imaginative or his visionary venture during these years as, again, as his most difficult experiment. And he really tapped into the mythic imagination during this time. And you can see too that through his works, and he was very prolific, so many works, he really did elevate this idea of language, right? That language in its origin and essence are simply a system of signs or symbols that denote real occurrences or their echo in the human soul. So this idea that myth as language, symbols as language, these are all kind of recurring themes and principles in the work of these folks that we consider these pattern masters, right? One of his students, Marie-Louise von Franz, collaborated with Jung in many ways. She helped him with translating some of his work. She interpreted a lot of his works and research around alchemy for him. And they, you know, she was really just someone who took his ideas to different places, right? Through her own interpretation and understanding of these principles. But one of the things that she was really fascinated with was this idea of the collective unconscious and the archetypes. And she studied that mostly through her research with fairy tales. And you might be familiar with her interpretation of fairy tales, the shadow and evil in fairy tales. She's had so many books where she really breaks down fairy tales, which, you know, when people talk about myths, right? We talk about myths, we talk about legends and fairy tales, sometimes in the same breath. But, and I'd also invite you to kind of even share in the chat what you might think are the differences between, say, fairy tales and myths, right? Because there is a difference, you know, there's so many similar elements, similar structures of language and patterns that are used within fairy tales and mythologies, but there is a difference. And I'm just curious, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but I'd like you to, if you're willing to share in the chat if you have any thoughts or ideas around the difference between myth and fairy tales. So again, her work with alchemy and the symbolism, these are some of her works, and then other works that she interpreted with the research of Jung and their collaborations. And she collaborated with Jung up until his death. And she was really recognized in the field as, you know, just a formidable figure in her own right, as far as it goes with psychology and anthropology and the study of these patterns. One of the quotes from Marie-Louise von Franz, she says, "If we can stay with the tension of opposites long enough, sustain it, be true to it, we can sometimes become vessels within which the divine opposites come together and give birth to a new reality." I love this quote from her because she really does speak to the language of the psyche, right? The language of myth. We see things in opposites, we think in opposites, even if we don't realize that. And that is our cultural training. That happens a lot with our cultural upbringing, and it can change and shift depending on where we're from and how we are raised. But this idea that giving birth to a new reality, for me as someone who studies contemporary mythology and say speculative fiction, and the works of, say, sci-fi and Afrofuturism, these are all things that I think about in terms of how to create stories that can transform, you know, and to do that, you really have to understand the language, the tools in which you're using in order to create these changes and to shift these consciousness towards the world we want to see. But one of my favorite definitions of mythology comes from an anthropologist and a dancer and artist named Maya Deren, who said, she wrote a book called The Divine Horseman. And she did a lot of research in the Caribbean, I think in Haiti specifically. And she says that myth is the facts of the mind manifest in the fiction of matter. And I love this definition because it speaks to the metaphysics of mythology and this idea that, you know, and to the relationship between myth and reality, which is what von Franz with that last quote is kind of speaking to as well. And I think that it goes to show that, you know, just the power of belief and the power of image in terms of how these things that we see also shape our reality, right? And we can get into that more about visual culture from media that we consume on a daily basis. When you think about this, like, you know, it's not just myth in terms of religion, right? Because you can imagine how someone who is devout in any particular faith, the reality that they live on a daily basis is going to be shaped by their belief system and how they view the world. And that changes and can bend and shape, you know, like truth. And our definitions of art and beauty, a lot of things are relative, and we have to remember that so is reality. And myth has a lot to do with how reality is experienced by each individual, as well as communities and cultures. But I think one of the, I guess, signature or biggest figures in mythology that most folks know of today is Joseph Campbell, right? He is responsible for the narrative model of the hero's journey or the monomyth. If you'll see here, I'm trying to move my screen here. Pardon me, I'm trying to move the, there we go. So the hero's journey always begins with the call. One way or another, a guide must come to say, look, you're in sleepy land, wake, come on a trip. There's a whole aspect of your consciousness, your being, that's not, that has not been touched. So you're at home here. Well, there's not enough of you here, and so it starts, right? That's kind of how he's speaking to what happens when we embark on the hero's journey. And I mean, Campbell was extremely prolific when it came to his research and writings around mythology. He was also a very, I mean, he was a huge reader, you know? He consumed so many texts, so many books on the subjects. In fact, at Pacifica Graduate Institute, where I got my degree, the archives of the Joseph Campbell archives are there through the Opus archives. And so everything that he's ever written, everything that he's ever read is there in the archive. And it's just really fascinating because you can go there and you can read his notes in the margins and everything. And he really is so fascinating. He was also a professor at Sarah Lawrence College. And this is one of his claims to fame. A lot of folks know him as a professor at Sarah Lawrence and the work that he did. But another of his works was this power of myth that maybe many of you have caught through PBS, right? It was a series with Bill Moyers. It spoke to mythology and all of its functions, right? And he broke it down in like a series of videos. It was really quite good. And that's the thing that kind of got me myself into mythology. I was sitting with my dad at his studio in South Philly, and he loved to watch PBS. And so he was watching this, and I was just like, that's when it was Joseph Campbell that really was my entree into the mythic world and understanding like the power of myth and the patterns that existed. And again, Joseph Campbell studied this idea of the monomyth and showing how the same kind of hero's journey can be viewed through Islam, through Christianity, through Judaism, right? Through many religions of the world and cultures, these things come about. But he also made a lot of distinctions and connections between the personal myth and the collective myth. And one of the things he did talk about the collective myth being something that was illuminated through our dreams, our collective dreams, which are our movies, right? So these are some of the quotes that you also might be familiar with. You are the hero of your own story. Again, that's kind of talking about the personal myth through the eyes of Joseph Campbell. Here are other quotes that you may see. I mean, so many memes are made from Joseph Campbell quotes, right? So many. But the main thing, though, I wanted to get back to the movies, that Joseph Campbell and the movies. You may be familiar with Star Wars. If you don't know about Joseph Campbell, you probably know. I mean, how can you live on this planet and not know about Star Wars, right? And so many people do know that Star Wars was an epic mythology that was inspired by the work of Hero with a Thousand Faces. So George Lucas teamed up with Joseph Campbell to explore this narrative and bring that to life through this epic that I was going to say epic trilogy, but now Star Wars is no longer just Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and the Return of the Jedi. There's so many spinoffs now, even like The Mandalorian, right? That's a new spinoff of Star Wars. And that's because the structure was so strong, the myth was so strong at its core, that I feel that it has become this timeless story that is embraced by so many and so many generations because of this vital mythology and the symbols that were used and the patterns that resonated, that really worked and keep working, right? I mean, is still going strong. So to kind of get a sense of what this hero's journey is, because one of the great things that Campbell is known for too is kind of breaking down the hero's journey into various, phases and, just moments of time that can be broken down. And again, there's so many different versions now of the hero's journey in terms of the Campbell's interpretation of it. But it begins, like I said, with the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, meeting with your mentor, your helper, crossing the threshold, the tests and the trials, right? Like these are all things that you probably can recall and even visualize in some of your most favorite films and stories that follow this narrative model. But then there's always like the return, right? This is true with like Greek mythology and this the idea of stories that we're familiar with, like Odysseus and the Odyssey, or all these kinds of things, even Captain Ahab and Moby Dick. I mean, you name it, right? But the thing is that now, I mean, this was like in the 80s, right? And so, here are some great images. I mean, just to kind of illustrate the call to adventure, Luke Skywalker here in Star Wars, him meeting with his father, right? Darth Vader, spoiler alert, if you didn't know, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. And so this idea of atonement and meeting with the father, and then also Yoda, right? Meeting with the mentor and the guide and the trials, that's him learning to be a Jedi, right? These are all familiar things that literally line up with the hero's journey and the monomyth that Joseph Campbell laid out. But this is what I think that is great, is that, well, how do you break down this journey? What is it really all about? What is the hero's journey all about? And I like when he kind of focuses on the fact that it's not about like the malice, the ignorance, the pride, the love. The goal of the hero's journey is yourself, right? It's really about finding yourself. So you go all around the world, you complete all these trials, but when you get back to the return, right, and you return home, it's all about how you yourself, the hero, has been transformed, right? And so now we have to kind of talk about, like, again, this was like Campbell made his thing in the 80s. And as you can think about 2021 and all the issues that are relevant today in terms of the expansion of our sense of identity when it comes to gender, you can imagine that, eventually someone's going to think, wait a second, what about the heroine's journey? And this is why I love Maureen Murdoch's work is really so important, because even though it really just scratches the surface in terms of, how many ways the journey can be explored through different perspectives of identity, right? I think that she really cracked the shell so that we could understand, I mean, not to get into discussions of patriarchy and this and that, the other thing, but that is real in the sense that even Joseph Campbell and all of his brilliance and what he did for creating codes and understanding mythology from this kind of patternist point of view, he really didn't acknowledge I think Maureen Murdoch even came in contact with Campbell. She actually was a professor at Pacifica, and she's, I think she even attended Pacifica if I'm not mistaken, but when she had the opportunity to ask Joseph Campbell about the heroine's journey, he kind of dismissed it in a way that, I think if he was alive today, he would say, you know what? Yes, I was wrong. You're right. Because one of the things he thought about was that there is no need for the heroine's journey because the woman is the goal. For him, he felt like the woman is already the goal. She's not the journey, and that doesn't really, I don't know, that doesn't sit well, right? When we think about the fact that, yes, women have their own journeys, right? And so Maureen Murdoch really set out to explore this in different ways. And so she broke this down in different ways. And you can kind of can see the comparison between, some of the things like it begins with the union. It begins with the shift from the feminine to the masculine. There's still the road of trials, right? But then there's this idea of illusion of success. Like what can a woman achieve? What is success in the eyes of a woman, right? What are the goals of a woman? There's always the dissent. I think that as an individual, no matter your gender or how you may identify, we're always, like, every human being is going to experience this dark night of the soul when it comes to this path of transformation, right? But then it's a meeting with the goddess, not necessarily the father, but a meeting with the goddess, reconciliation with the feminine, and then the reincorporation of the masculine, because there is always this idea within the mythic consciousness that opposites are always in conflict, but also seeking balance and union within the whole, right? So these are some of the things that differentiate, at least through the eyes of Maureen Murdoch, right? Because I also want to be clear that Maureen Murdoch, just like Campbell set out to make the hero's journey. Maureen Murdoch updated that with her version of the heroine's journey. But and this is just another diagram showing that, but I do think that you could splice it so many different ways. It can be interpreted so many different ways. More recently, and this was just published last year, 2020, this woman, her name is Gail Carringer, and Gail Carringer came up with The Heroine's Journey, same title, but she kind of put her own spin on it, right? She had her own vision of how that would play out. You can see here, I won't go through the whole wheel, but you can kind of take a minute to look at the ways maybe hers differentiates from Murdoch's model, right? And I gotta say too, that even in my own dissertation, I explored, my dissertation was an exploration of apocalyptic myths and narratives and archetypes, particularly with female protagonists, right? So I was exploring apocalypse myths through the lens of female protagonists. And I was also looking at a new model that I called the quantum quest. So, when you think about the hero's journey or the quest journey or the quest myth, for me, if you think about how is the 21st century different from the 20th and the 19th century, well, and how are these journeys different? Well, when we think about technology and science and just our understanding of reality, this idea of the multiverse comes into play. And I don't even have enough hands to count how many stories about the multiverse have really just kind of erupted into popular culture and popular narratives from, we're not just talking about sci-fi, like time travel stuff, but even like ones that explore different dimensions of time and alternate realities that really even deal with our own, like say a Lovecraft Country, if you're familiar with that story, and things that kind of distort time and timelines. So these all relate to the multiverse. And that was kind of the narrative model that I was exploring in my own research. But here again, right, this is when we start to see these repetitions, even like visually. So we can talk about the narrative in terms of these themes and these motifs and recurring moments, but then what do they look like visually, right? And it's so amazing. I love doing this experiment because sometimes I don't even plan how well they just pop up and seem so iconically similar. But this is an image from Beasts of the Southern Wild that came out, I can't recall, I think it was late, maybe 2018, 17, I'm not sure, but recently, right? I would say it's a recent film. You may have seen it. It's a great film. And they recently, the same folks that did this film have a recent one called Wendy, I think, that's now on Netflix, but anyhow. And then again, we've got Luke Skywalker again, right? He's always kind of the go-to reference, but look at those images, look at the stance, look at the background, the foreground, you know, how these all kind of line up in a similar way. And so this young girl is on a journey, and you could definitely explore that as a heroine's journey, right? And it parallels in so many ways with the narratives and the models that we're already familiar with. These are some of actually the films that I'll be exploring in the course coming up, you know, so I just kind of wanted to give you a preview of some of the things that we're going to dive a little deeper into in exploring BIPOC, Black and Indigenous narratives that follow this model, but also kind of take their own detours and express it in different ways through different symbols. But again, like the model and the ideas and the patterns are similar, right? But we always can find so much insight and understanding in where they differ, you know, and that's kind of like the important thing, to kind of understand how the detours in this journey represent so much in terms of culture and understanding of particular communities. Oh, and I should say too, that was from that last image, was this one here, was from Whale Rider. And that was a Maori film that features this young girl who, well, I won't give it away, but she's on her heroine's journey as well. And these are more popular images, right? This recently just came out. This is Mulan. Disney's big on the heroine's journey and the hero's journey, right? Disney is really good at putting out and you know, trying different, I guess, aesthetic clothing, really, because really it's like, it's almost like that's what and I don't know if anyone said in the chat, but when you think about a fairy tale, the fairy tale is kind of like the skeleton structure of what a mythology could be, you know, and the mythology is kind of on the multiple layers and fleshing out of these characters and these ideas and these worlds in a more elaborate way. But Disney is good at doing both the fairy tale stuff as well as these more epic stories that have come out like Mulan, right? But then thinking about the heroine's journey and who gets to create it, right? It's not only women who are exploring the heroine's journey, but if you're familiar with the animation of Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki, he's absolutely amazing. And if you can even look at some of these are just images of some of the books, the films rather, that he has, you know, that have come out of his studio. And as you can just tell by the posters, that so many feature young heroines, right? He also talks about in his films and his stories, a lot of it is about ecology and nature. And when you think about the archetype of nature and the environment, you think about the feminine archetypes, right? Mother Earth or Gaia. And these are things that kind of parallel on that macro level, but as well as the micro, the individual journey, as well as the collective journey of humanity and just trying to save the planet, right? And Miyazaki does that in such a beautiful way where he aligns the heroine's journey with the struggle and the survival of humanity and the struggle to save our planet, really. And he does it in such a beautiful and imaginative way. Here's some of the figures from Hayao Miyazaki's. This is from Princess Mononoke, one of my favorites of all time as far as his films go. Does anyone remember Spirited Away? But this is an image from the journey of Spirited Away. And they're always so magical. He definitely explores this idea of the multiverse too, where his characters are not just taking journeys on the earthly plane, but they're going to the spiritual realm. They're going, back in time. It's really just amazing meeting different characters that are real, imaginary, spiritual, human, and everything in between. But again, like, I think it's important to understand, right, that when we're talking about the heroine's journey, the hero's journey, and looking at mythic narratives and stories in general through the eyes of anyone, before we can kind of codify anything as a kind of broad stroke norm, we have to remember that the heroine's journey isn't going to work. Like Maureen Murdoch's heroine's journey isn't going to necessarily work for everyone, right? And so I love to mention the work of Bell Hooks, who really took some careful moments. Like, I feel like she's very prolific as well, right? But these are some of her books. And again, through my studies of art education is how I came across Bell Hooks. So I came across her years ago, but I've always kind of come back to Bell Hooks because she reminds me of how important it is to have a critical perspective on identity, how identity has to inform everything, the way we look at the world, the way we see, but also in the ways that we create, right? Because, it's not just our job to consume culture, but as folks that also contribute and create culture, it's important to understand how all these things connect. And one of the things that I know, one of the influences of Bell Hooks was definitely the work of Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire is the author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it might seem like a divergent perspective in terms of critical pedagogy, but I think not, because for me, again, like trying to understand literacy, that was a big part of his work, understanding literacy as a means for liberation and praxis of freedom. And for Freire, he worked with this idea of the thematic universe, right, as a starting point for oppressed peoples to understand their world, right? And a way that he had them do this was to codify the world. They had to understand it, but in order to do that, they had to identify the things that were oppressing them, their hopes, their fears, their dreams, everything in between. And one of the quotes from Freire's work is that without a sense of identity, there can be no real struggle, right? And again, this idea of identity and this being like the kind of defining perspective for all journeys, like the thing that really sets each journey apart, is really important to understand. And so I think that particularly when we're talking about, and we're going to get into this in the course and talking about BIPOC perspectives for liberation and narratives that deal with these kinds of journeys of survival, of transformation, and of trying to explore new realities, right, through freedom and liberation, and what those possibilities could mean. Freire's work is really important, I think, in my own work as a storyteller, for how these things can be possible as I discover and explore concepts of mythic literacy and the building blocks of that, which again, to bring it back to myth and literacy, we're talking about archetype and symbol. So he says that the teacher is, of course, an artist, but being an artist does not mean that he or she can make the profile, can shape the students. What the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves, right? And I think that that's, in this sense, this is like, I love how Freire kind of connects the teacher and the artist, right? Because I think that so many artists are teachers, whether you're in art education specifically or not. There's definitely an art to teaching and learning. There's a science to it too, right? But there's definitely an art to teaching, no matter what subject you're in, even if you're a math teacher, right? There's an art to the way you create your lessons. There's an art to the way you approach how students are going to understand the concepts, the terms, the ideas. And I think that, that relates back to codifying and understanding language, right? Just like math is a language, but kind of bringing it back to this cultural perspective in terms of models of narratives and storytelling. I think it's also important to mention the work of Robin D.G. Kelley. He wrote this book called Freedom Dreams, and it was about the Black radical imagination. And he really breaks down this understanding of, you know, how we view the world through, yes, a collective consciousness, but that collective consciousness as far as like humanity, right? That's one thing. But we also have a cultural consciousness that belongs to us as either Black and brown people, or to whatever cultural you know, group that you may belong to. We all have our own kind of sensibilities, aesthetics, archetypes that are specific to our own culture, right? And these are the ways that we create our own stories, you know, through this lens, one that is populated by the archetypes, the symbols, the aesthetics that are familiar to this particular culture. And I love the way he's done this, and others have done it as well. Oh, these are some of his works. He does a lot of things around race theory and critical theory, as well as pedagogy as well. But I wanted to talk about how remember we talked about the Black radical imagination as it relates to Kelley's work, but it also became a very powerful film series called Black Radical Imagination. The curators were Amir George and Aaron Christoval. I believe the series is still active today. It screened, I think, excerpts or some part of the tour. They took this on tour across the country. It came here to Philly through the Black Star Film Festival. And I'm very familiar with Aaron Christoval and the work, and was actually doing work with them with the connected to my own initiatives in Afrofuturism. But I really think it's important for us to recognize that, yes, the imagination and film, right? How film is really this collective dream. And one of the best ways that we can learn about the consciousness from which these realities are born, you know? Because again, the imagination is that it's that fertile ground through which, you know, these myths are created, but also again, as myths are related to reality, it's important to understand this connection. And I think so much it's recognized now. Last month was Black History Month. A lot of people are talking about Black History Month and kind of taking it to the next level and calling it now Black History, Black Futures Month, right? Because this idea of the imagination about thinking about the past, present, and the future, these are all a part of these patterns, patterns of birth, death, and rebirth that are known to mythology, past, present, and future. These are all things that we can start to identify as ways that we organize our mind and our myths and our dreams. I think too, like, I had to throw this in talking about Toni Morrison, because I think, first of all, she's just so amazing in terms of her writing and her stories, and people might not see them as mythologies, but I think that they are. Like, her collective body of work kind of represents this mythology in its own right, this mythology of Blackness and girlhood and womanhood and what that means. Obviously, she's, you know, so prolific. She has written so much. But she also has another way of coloring and, you know, informing the heroine's journey, you know, through a different lens, through the lens of Blackness, through the lens of young Black girls and women as well. So I think that, you know, I just wanted to kind of drop her in as a reminder that, you know, again, everyone has a journey, right? There are as many journeys out there as there are human beings, but we also like to look at how these journeys connect and what these similarities may be. And that kind of brings me to the time.
Yeah, we just have about 12 minutes left in the program. So
Okay.
maybe just a couple more minutes and then we'll open it up to questions, if that's all right. I
that
can't interrupt
perfect.
you when you're talking about Octavia Butler. That would feel too bad.
Right, like, hold on, right? No, but that's good because I'm wrapping things up now, so that's great. Thank you so much, Abby. So yes, so folks know and love Octavia Butler. If you don't, she's truly just such a gift to the world when it comes to ideas of storytelling, especially about the future, right? A lot of folks connect Octavia Butler to Afrofuturism. I think she most readily identify as a science fiction writer. And I think that for her, the way stories come into play, she says that every story I create creates me. I write to create myself, you know? And I think it's so important to understand that, you know, a part of this idea of the heroine's journey, you know, so much of that is infused into her work, but she does it in such a creative way that, again, it's just like, it seems different, right? And that is the trick, to take these models, right, and not kind of make it a cookie cutter kind of a blueprint that, you know, doesn't have any authenticity or originality, right? That's not what we're going for. What we're going on, this idea of language and how it can communicate across so many cultures and things, because we are able to find this commonality. These are just, you know, examples of her work. Obviously, Parable of the Sower is the one that is so popular right now because it is just so profoundly prophetic in terms of the way that she has painted a world of the future, which is very, very much like the world we're living in today. And, you know, it's just fascinating how a lot of these stories that were kind of inspired by the times also really just feel like reality, you know, and this idea of art and reality mirroring each other. Oh, this is a quote from Robin Kelly. We can skip that and move on. Oh, I think we're done. So that was it. So actually, then I will say that this last quote from Robin Kelly, what does it say? Without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. So that's about it.
Thank you, Lee. That was fantastic. Sorry, my voice keeps going out today, but I wanted to make sure we just have a couple minutes left. And so if folks have questions for you about the amazing scholarship you just shared with us or about the class, we'd love to hear from you all. Just a reminder, you can put things in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, if you want to click the raise hand function, we will call on you and hear from you today. There's so many different directions that, or things to dig into. I'm glad that this is in some ways just a beginning, since we'll get to dig into it more in your course. But giving folks just a second. Thank you for the love in the chat, and also for the folks that answered your myth and fairy tale question. I know we had some really thoughtful comments from Christine and Genevieve and and Susanna. We have a Susanna, I want to call on you, but I just want to quickly answer Anne. So we have, I'll drop a link to this in the chat, but this is a preview for a 4-part series that Lee is going to be teaching starting March 25th. So it's a course called, I should know this off the top of my head, New Myths in Black and Indigenous Art and Film. So I'll drop that in just a second. Great question. Susanna, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then Anne, I see your hand too.
Hey, hi Lee. It's nice hearing your talk today.
Yeah, it's so great to see you.
Yeah. I was wondering how you reconcile, or can you reconcile, the sort of more universal approach of, say, a Levi Strauss or a Jung versus like a bell hooks or a Freire. Like how do you make those things work with each other?
Can you say that one more time, because my audience, say it one more time, because it's I can tell it's a good question. I want to make sure I hear it well.
So you have like Levi Strauss and Jung that have fairly universal framings of myths. That's their whole deal.
Right.
And then that's sort of where you start, and that's also like chronologically where, you know, the intellectual moment was at that point.
Right.
And then you end up a little bit later with like Freire and bell hooks, and, you know, Octavia Butler and Toni Morrison, who are taking a much more sort of particular, sort of historically grounded, I am embodied in this space and time.
Right.
How do you reconcile that sort of universalist versus particularist approach?
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. I think I always come back to Freire's thematic universe, right? And that was the thing that allowed me to take the principles and ideas of his critical pedagogy and get creative with it, right? I would be able to explore the thematic universe visually and creatively with images and art, you know, even though I had never really seen him or in his text that really be kind of illustrated in that way. But I kind of took it to then think about thematic universe. I also thought about, for example, Carl Jung and the idea of the complex, the psychological complex. It's defined as a constellation of images, right? And I started thinking about, okay, well, Jung talks about this constellation of images as the complex, right? I actually wrote about the apocalypse complex in my dissertation. And so I thought about, okay, the apocalypse complex as this constellation of images, light and dark, shadow, good and evil, all these things. But then also thinking about the thematic universe that Freire talks about in respect to mythic literacy and this idea of, well, what are the images constellating oppressed peoples in this time? You know, what are the images that are populating their thematic universe that then relate to possibly a complex that might be revealed, you know? And then how does that lead to certain images that say, Bell Hooks might talk about as far as art in my mind, right? And the way that she really breaks down how to interpret and critically view art through the lens of race, class, and gender, you know? It just becomes different ways to break things down, to look at them, you know? And it's really fascinating how many similarities there are between Freire and, I mean, Bell Hooks even, if I'm not mistaken, a few times quotes Freire in her work, right? But then again, I even feel like Robin D. Kelly, in his book, especially in Freedom Dreams, I found Freedom Dreams at my school, at my library at Pacifica, which means that obviously, and he had quoted Carl Jung in his book in reference to the collective unconscious and these ideas. So there are like little kind of gems of ideas that cross over between these figures. But I really think it's kind of up to each of us to figure out what works, you know? Because even still with these models for the hero's journey and things like that, I feel that like I'm still trying to figure out what connects between, say, my version of the quantum quest and this you know, journey through the eyes of a BIPOC protagonist, as opposed to Joseph Campbell and his journey, where he felt the woman really didn't, she had no place in those footsteps. She was only the goal of the destination, you know? And as much as I love Campbell, you know, I feel like, gosh, he really got that wrong, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, woman is the prize is definitely not something I want to endorse.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna, for that question. And Lee, I think I saw a hand that might have gone away already. If folks want to, we have just I think we have time for maybe one more question if folks want to, or maybe two if we get enthused. Oh, Christine. Perfect. I'm gonna lower your hand.
Thank you. So I have a question about, you talked about Yoda, for example, being like this master or guru or helper that helps the hero on their quest. And then I'm thinking about like Parable of the Sower, where the protagonist does it herself. She doesn't have sort of mystical powers, right?
Right.
And then like Lovecraft Country, where you have this really overt system of oppression against the protagonists, right? And the heroes. And how, can you talk a little bit about whether Jung and these other thinkers ever talked about this systemic issues versus your own personal experience and doing it yourself versus you can't do it yourself because of this system?
You know, that's a very interesting question. One thing I can say though is that I feel that like when it comes to Lauren Oya Olamina from Parable of the Sower, even though there was no like real definitive guide, like she didn't like there was no meeting of the mentor per se in her particular journey, but I feel that like her hyper empathy might have been like her force, right? Like when you think about the Jedi and the Force, like she basically took what was an ailment, what was like, you know, a weakness with this hyper empathy. And if you haven't read the novel, she suffers from this syndrome where she can feel other people's pain and pleasure as well. But the pain is really debilitating. You know, you can think about when you're in a post-apocalyptic world, how there's danger all around, violence and whatnot, how this syndrome could really be a problem, right? But for her, she eventually uses her hyper empathy as this tool for liberation in a way, right? As a world building tool to connect with others along her journey, to kind of empathize and understand that they're all connected and that there was ways that they could survive and grow and even thrive together through this new religion that she was creating. So in that sense, I feel like you can always find a way where there's still some morsel of the thread of the thing from the past that has just been reinterpreted, right? And so even in, I don't know, I would even say that her guide might have been her own higher self, right? Like as she was journaling, you know, you might think that as she's trying to create this religion Earthseed, that there was the Lauren Olamina that was like the survivor, like on the physical plane, but then that was her higher self that was like being, you know, receiving these messages around what God was in this new world, you know, and she was the author of that. And she even elevated to this place of prophecy, like she became a prophet within her community. And so in that sense, like, I don't know, like that would be a very interesting way to kind of recreate the hero's journey, understanding like what if there is no mentor, you know, like how do we, and that's why like I invite this idea that, you know, yes, we got to learn and we can, you know, kind of follow these paths that were laid out for us, these blueprints that make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. But then we have to, just like our symbols, we have to create new symbols. We have to find new archetypes that really speak to our time, our zeitgeist of the moment, you know, and that's important for every generation. They have to find new symbols that speak to them, you know, and that might be new models of storytelling too, if that answers your question a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Such a great question. And such a wonderful way to end the program, thinking of finding new symbols and new pathways. And I just finished Parable of the Talents about a week ago, and so it's great to hear your interpretation of that character. But I wanted,
Me
yeah,
too, same timeline. Let's do book club.
that's I love that. But I wanted to, you know, say thank you to everyone who joined us, and of course a huge thank you to Dr. Lee Sumpter. So huge round of applause for you. And you know, I'm going to drop all those links in the chat one more time for anyone who is late joining us. We'd love to have you in the series and again for another program. Lee, I'll let you have the last word, and then if folks want to unmute and say goodbye.
Yes, all I can say is thank you so much. It was great to see all of your faces. You had great questions. You got me thinking myself about what comes next, you know? So this is great. That's why I love being in conversation with folks about these topics, because something new always pops up, you know, always new ways of thinking about old stuff, right? So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. I hope everyone gets some sunshine at some point.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Feel
Thank
free
you.
to unmute and say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
See ya, bye.